At last, the winter months are over and the race season is underway, and we're here at the historic Donington Park circuit for the Masters race weekend. The Masters Historic Race Weekend was held on the Friday and Saturday of Easter and was the first competitive fixture of the year for the East Midlands circuit. When we arrived, the pre-66 HGPCA grid was going out for their practice session. That's the Lotus 18 of James Hargan just going out onto the circuit. The nice thing about the Masters race weekend is that it's a very relaxed, smaller scale meeting compared to, say, the Donington Historic Festival, which is a bigger event that happens a few weeks later. The lower paddock is only probably about half full, but it's still full of really interesting stuff. This is Brian Cordwell's 1964 Austin Healeys 3000 in the familiar works colours of red and white. And this is Marcus Jewell's Ford Lotus Cortina. This was entered for the Masters Pre-66 Touring Cars race, which was being run on the Saturday. It has, of course, the Lotus Twin Cam 1600cc engine, and I noticed it has the console badging on the front bonnet there. I wonder if that makes it an early car. And this is David Smithy's lovely-looking Austin Healeys 3000. And this, the Thompson and Allison TVR Griffiths in that eye-catching yellow livery. They were meant to be actually racing a Shelby Daytona Cobra according to the programme, but this is obviously an equally fearsome machine. And the Lotus Elite of Robert Ingram. It's the other end of the horsepower scale, but their lightness and agility often makes up for their lack of horsepower. The HGPCA tent is always a welcome home in the paddock. The Historic Grand Prix Cars Association so often have to combine their grids. But thankfully at this meeting they had two separate races, one for the pre-61 front engine cars and one for the pre-66 rear engine cars. And so there was a wonderful collection of front engine Grand Prix cars present, including this, Fred Harper's Curtis KK500. There's over 4 litres of Offenhauser power there. And in contrast, you couldn't get more British than two Cooper Bristols. Originally, of course, in the 1950s, they would have been Formula 2 cars and made famous by Mike Hawthorne. Once they were indecently quick when driven by the likes of Flavien Marseille and Gregor Fiskin about 20 years ago, but they don't seem to be as quick now. This is Mark Bates' lovely 1965 Porsche 911. He's another seasoned campaigner, and this looks lovely in that red and white livery. There was a small grid of GT cars from 2007 to 2018, and that was Neil Glover's Lamborghini, I believe, leaving to put in a practice lap. Another incredibly quick TVR Griffiths 200, the 1965 4.7 litre car belonging to John Spears. Alongside it was another of Spears' cars, the McLaren M1B. Again, a 1965 car, but this time with a 5.7 litre engine. Only 24 M1Bs were made to compete in the Can-Am series in North America. Alongside is Gary First in his Lola T212. So Gary's car is fearsomely quick, but only has the 1800cc engine. A far younger car than the McLaren, being a 1971 car. And you can see the progression of the shape of the sports cars between the McLaren and the Lola, the McLaren being far more curvaceous and still having an element of that early 60s shape to the more angular, blockish shape of the Lola. Both cars wearing wonderfully period correct liveries. And that's the lovely dark green Lola T70 rumbling past. That's another 1971 car. Back to one of the gentleman drivers' cars, and something very special in my eyes. The Morgan +4 SLR from 1965. Just over 2 litres and so pretty. The body was designed by John Sprinzel and Chris Lawrence, and only 4 were made, and one of them went on to a Triumph TR4 chassis, and a rather naked looking Lotus 16. This is Max Smith Hilliard's 1958 car. Alongside is John Clark's rear engine Cooper T56. A wonderful history associated with that 1961 car, driven by both Surtees and Salvadori. The familiar 1.5 litre Coventry Climax engine with double Weber carbs on it. Here's Steve Jones's Lotus Elan 26R being readied for the 90-minute Gentleman Drivers Enduro. And these cars are not gently paced through the 90 minutes, so the race prep guys are doing as much as they can to make sure that their cars last the distance. Back to the front engine Grand Prix cars, and it doesn't get much better than this for me. 2 Maserati 250Fs. One of the greatest Grand Prix cars of all time, and of course made famous by Fangio. And another of the front engine greats, Tony Smith's Ferrari 246 Dino. This is a very special Grand Prix car. It is in actual fact the last front engine Grand Prix car to win a Grand Prix, and that was in the hands of the world champion Phil Hill, and that was the 1960 Italian Grand Prix. This is Mark Shaw's wonderful Scarab. It's another 1960 Grand Prix car, but this one didn't do so well in period. The beautiful Scarabs were bankrolled by Woolworth's heir Lance Reventolo. George Foles, Tony Smith's mechanic, a familiar face around the HGPCA race paddocks, is just undertaking the last few checks. He must know that car better than anybody else. This is another splendid machine competing in the Masters Sports Car Legends. It's the Cooper Monaco King Cobra. Essentially a Cooper Monaco with a 4.7 litre V8 stuffed into the back. It won't surprise you to hear that Carroll Shelby was behind the project, and it did incredibly well in the early 60s in the Can-Am series. That striking colour is actually known as Viking Blue. And now some on-track action with the HGPCA front-engine Grand Prix cars. We've got Maseratis out there, Indy cars, and I think that's also a lone ERA in the mix. The silver car there at the back is a Lister Monza. That's an interesting car as it took part in the 1958 Race of Two Worlds event held at Monza in Italy. That was a race between the American Indy drivers and Europe's Formula One teams. Jack Fairman drove that Jaguar-powered car, and it was entered by Akira Kos. That's Tony Smith in the Ferrari Dino coming unstuck. It's deceptively slow, that corner. The Ferrari engine sounding glorious. Donington has a reputation for being slippy. People say it's due to the aircraft fuel from the aircraft landing at the nearby East Midlands Airport. Whether that's true or not, I'm not sure. Mark Shaw in the Scarab came home first in the front engine race. This is the small grid of the what I call modern GT cars heading down into the old hairpin. Being only a few years old, these cars have downforce, and the resulting speed in which they can take the corners is quite phenomenal. This is the formation of the HGPCA's rear engine grid, and it looks like a tremendous entry. Donington suffers from having no decent vantage points for the amateur cameraman, so you have to grab a hole in the catch fencing where you can. And it was Justin Mears who came home first in the 1964 Brabham BT11. Then it was the long 90-minute enduro for the gentleman drivers. This was a race for pre-66 GT cars, and it's obviously split into classes, but it was always going to be a battle up front between the TVR Griffiths and the E-types. There were actually 4 TVRs at the front of the grid, led by the one we saw earlier, number 14, the John Spears car. Behind the TVRs was the quick Lotus 26R of Giles Dawson. Also, there was the E-type of the Pearson brothers, as well as the Shelby Daytona Cobra. And that's Niall McFadden's gorgeous E-type. What a wonderful green that paintwork is. And he is sharing the driving with ultra-quick Phil Keane. And number 84, that's the Steve Jones Lotus 26R we saw earlier. And there's the wonderful Turner number 611. That's actually got a 1700cc engine in it, and it's not the little 998cc engine which we're so familiar with powering the little Turners. So it was a rolling start for the 36 or so cars. They come through the chicane, and then it's hard down on the power, and those TVRs following line astern, and the V8s making a glorious cacophony of sound. And the Healey going well there, chased by the Elan. The Pearson brothers managed to get the E-type up to second behind Spears. But Spears did a great job of keeping the Pearsons at bay.
And another slower lap for the leaders. That means despite the penalty on the road, there is a battle for the lead up across the line. John Davison is suddenly just one.
The brothers didn't make their job any easier by being given a 10-second penalty for not turning their engine off during the mandatory pit stop.
Comes through in third position. Then Nigel Greensill, the fastest driver on the circuit, sets another fastest lap of the race. So 1 minute, John Davison at this stage.
For a short time, John Davidson in the number 88 TVR took the lead. And that's Andrew Jordan in the eye-catching black Corvette with the yellow stripe on its flanks.
On the road, under all types of pressure now from John Davison's TVR Griffiths as they head for the leader.
And that is the Pearson E-type being closely followed by the Davison TVR number 88 and the lovely Ginetta G4 of Ron Maidens. Such a pretty little car and doing very well to keep up with those big engine leaders. And there we see the speed which the light, agile Lotus Elan can take through the chicane.
the 30 or so that took the start, first 3 qualifiers.
And the wonderful Shelby Daytona Cobra, pretty sure that's a replica, but wonderful all the same. And the Lotus Elans carrying maybe too much speed into the chicane and having to take a wider line.
British Touring Car champion from 2013. How's he getting? Well, at least one car off, and that car number 165, Charlie Allison, has gone off in the car that he shares with Peter Thompson, that's in 8th position. That's got back going again. But it's,
in the end, after 90 minutes of incredibly tight racing, it was the Spears and Greensaw TVR that came home first.
55 laps in the book, and the gap is 1.2 seconds now.
So the gentleman driver's 90-minute enduro race brought Friday's racing to a close. The sun started to set on a wonderful day, where we had been looking at some very special cars and witnessed some extremely tight racing on one of our great national circuits.